The best time to buy a football club is when an owner is run out of money, he can't afford to buy the football club anymore, so he's got the least amount of leverage in the deal. You've got the most leverage, but you want to grab the football club before it lands into administration. At one point during my time at the EFL, it was me and one other person enforcing the financial regulations of 72 football clubs. Like, that resource has now grown within the EFL. They're at max, if they get the new hires in that they want, they'll get up to 5 people. Now, still, that's 5 people looking after 72 football clubs. Success is simple, but difficult to do. So it's simple, but hard. So sometimes it is just a case of just improving your match day experience, engaging better with your local communities. It's like, get the basics right.
Welcome to the Football Economy, the show where we explore the financial forces shaping the global evolution of football. I'm Ibrahim, and today we're diving into the rules, risks, and opportunities shaping the business of football, in the lower leagues especially, where sustainability, regulation, and razor-thin margins define the game off the pitch. To help us navigate this complex terrain, I'm joined by Joshua Price. Joshua is the founder and CEO of Goal Assist, a specialist consultancy firm focused on football finance in terms of sustainability. Before launching this firm, Joshua worked at the English Football League, conducting financial reviews, regulatory assessments, and benchmarking reports for clubs across the league system. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Joshua to the pod.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Yeah, I mean, just to give a bit of like a background into who you are, I'd like to say that, first of all, you invited me to your pod, and this is how, obviously, I came across your work and your consultancy firm. And yeah, it's kind of a very impressive sort of like operation you're running in terms of being able to leverage your experience working in the AFL and trying to obviously provide more competitive advantages to these clubs specifically. But let me take a step back when it comes to football itself, but look at you from a personal perspective. Looking back, let's go back, let's say when you were 12 or 13, what would you say your 13-year-old version of yourself would say about you currently now? Would that person say you're on the right path, or would they, say, well, there's more to come?
My 12-year-old self, well, it's quite funny actually, because the honest answer is it would probably be very happy with where I've got to, because so I remember in our last year of primary school, which would have been, I can't remember, but it would have been in and around that age. One of the things we had to do before we left was sort of say what we're going to be when we grow up. It was one of those things that the school got everyone to say. And everyone was saying, oh, I'm going to be a footballer, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. And even at that point, I said, I'm going to own my own business. And the reason why, which is a strange thing for a kid to say, but the reason why I'd said that is because my parents own their own business. It's gardening and construction supply, so it's not in the football industry. And I think my parents, well, especially my dad, was aware that I was a very good football player, but was never going to be like, when you know, sort of thing. And I think obviously through parents' eyes is like, he's always going to enjoy playing football, but he's probably not going to be a professional. And that was sort of kindly relayed to me, even at a young age, like, look, it's very difficult to be a football player. So so I always sort of had aspirations of owning my own business, even at a very young age. But the sort of journey to get to where I am now wasn't just straight into the entrepreneurial pathway, like we said. So I went off to university. I studied at UCFB Etihad campus. So I was up at Manchester City, and I studied football business and finance. So I got a first class honours degree, won the sort of award for the unit of football business and finance. And then off the back of that, got the job at the EFL. So originally, sort of like my mind has sort of shifted to, I'd love to be a CEO of a football club. That's sort of like when I sort of started my studies and stuff, that's sort of where I saw my future going. And then I got the job at the EFL, which was brilliant, made loads of brilliant contacts, and I learned a lot. And we'll go into a bit more of that later. I sort of realized that I didn't see my future as an employee. I really wanted to own my own thing and build my own things. Yeah, the opportunity sort of came about. Timing in the market was right. So like I say, about 2.5 years ago, I founded Goal Assist, and it's gone really well. So the 12-year-old looking at me today would be like, oh, wow, he owns his own business and it's in football. That's even better. So I think he'd be relatively happy with where I've got to.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's It's a fair analysis of your, your current self, from your past perspective, from your past age perspective. But yeah, so I mean, let's look at the EFL, the time there. So first of all, during that time there, obviously a lot of like moving parts. What would you say, looking back, reflecting now, were the sort of like acute financial pressures you saw, specifically around League One clubs, in terms of trying to balance the competitive ambition that they needed to obviously fulfill their goals and targets, and also the fan base's ambition itself, with also obviously regulatory compliance?
Yeah, I think it differed club by club. So it wasn't like this is how football works. I think there's sort of like a myth around like everybody wants to achieve this sort of same goal, and we're trying to be collaborative as an industry. But realistically, each owner has their own goals. Each football club has its own challenges. Some of them being geographic, some of them being demographic. There's so many different challenges at different football clubs, and I was in the sort of prime position to sort of look over all 72 clubs because I was the one assessing their financial regulations, and sort of understood actually there is different issues for different football clubs, and some of which football clubs have already answered. So this football club already has solved that issue, and that football club's struggling with it at the moment. And it was a case of I just knowing my being the person who was marking the regulations, I thought I was best person to help you fill them out because I know exactly how they're marked because I was the one marking them. So that was one thing. The other thing is we could see the independent regulator coming. So obviously, someone inside the EFL, we knew what was sort of going on externally. I originally was positioned in the finance department. So I was sort of just like, it was one or two of us in the finance department. Then we started our new club financial reporting unit. So we built out sort of a bigger, fuller team working on these financial regulations, as obviously the spotlight of the European Super League and everything like that sort of came about. So what essentially, when you talk about like, how did this sort of why now and all the rest of it, it's because the regulatory pressures grew because of the fact there was a bigger spotlight on sort of financial stability. You know, we had Bury and Macclesfield and obviously a lot with Derby. So there was a lot of key sort of case studies out in the public saying like something's going wrong in football. What is it? We need tighter regulations to control this spending because the pressure of trying to spend to compete, but then also comply, it's got very complex. The question you say about what like sort of the challenges that faces clubs, I think it's down to the owners really, in my opinion, because it's up to the owners to say how much they're willing to inject into the club, because basically most of football works on an owner benefactor model. So most of the football clubs operate based on how much money the owner's willing to give them each year. So it's up to the owner to set that budget. So if that is far in excess of what the revenues the club can naturally generate, the dependence on that becomes more and more. And therefore, if that's ever taken away, that's when the challenges come about. So that's slightly different in terms of the ambitions of individual clubs. But it's all about sort of supporting them to do it in a sustainable way and trying to figure out, the money that's been invested into the football club, should some of this, a portion of this, rather than it all being on pitch performance, should it be to improve the revenue streams of the football club so it can then sort of support itself better rather than always being reliant on the owner? So that's sort of like some of the stuff that we look at.
Well, okay. So, I mean, you mentioned a few things there. You did just mention owner dependence in a way. So, let's take a look at that. So, owner dependence, owner funding, different ways of the terminology can be expressed in different ways. So, let's say that you're looking at a club's finances, and obviously it's well known that League One, League Two clubs, Championship clubs, heavily dependent on owner funding, owner finances. Where's the pathway to basically becoming less dependent on that, on owner funding? What clubs do you see right now currently finding more innovative ways, not just financial engineering, but actual revenue generational schemes that potentially could help them free them from owner finances?
Yeah, I think there'll never be a position in which a football club is fully free from it. I think it's because it's natural that one of the best, so not one of the best, one of the biggest rewards in football, and this is where we talk about financial distribution, is through on-pitch performance. Because if you can get promoted, you're going to get a larger distribution of the sort of media funds, and therefore you'll get a lot more money. So it's like, if we can invest an extra £1 million on the pitch, but then we get promoted and we get access to an extra £4 million of TV money, let's just say, that risk and reward is what is driving owners to invest on pitch. So I think there will always be, even if redistribution gets addressed and there's less gaps within the pyramid, there will always be a reward for promotion. So there will always be investment in the pitch. Also, depending on the owner's motives, you may not be bothered about the business of the football club. You might just want to lift trophies. Do you know what I mean? Your whole objective as an owner might be, I want to buy a football club just to try and make the best football team I can and try and lift some trophies. So then in that scenario, all the money's always going to go into the pitch. But in terms of what football clubs are being creative, there's obvious examples, sort of like Wrexham, in sort of like the way in which they've leveraged the media attention of the famous owners. You've also got other clubs are doing it different ways. You know, for me, it's clubs who can build an identity globally are those who are going to win, right? So you've got football clubs who are more aligned with sort of crypto and this sort of this online sort of crypto community. There's lots of people that sort of buy into this future of sort of crypto is going to be, you know, the future of financing. And associating yourself to that access is sort of like a new sort of tribe of people, if you like. I use the word tribe because football is very tribal. But I also think there's sometimes it's like success is simple but difficult to do. So it's simple but hard. So sometimes it is just a case of just improving your match day experience, engaging better with your local communities. It's like, get the basics right. You know, if you're turning up on a match day and there's only one disabled toilet and it's blocked and it's not working, what does that say about your sort of accessibility for disabled fans? Like, you're not going to keep going if you haven't got access. The same with like men's and women's toilets. I know I'm talking about toilets on the podcast, but my point is like the match day experience is just like, make sure like they're greeted with a smile, make sure that the tickets are affordable, make sure they've got opportunity. People will spend their money and they'd rather spend their money with their football club than elsewhere. Like, if you've got really good pre-match entertainment, people would. I know there's the argument now you're taking away from the local pubs and whatever, but like, you know, there's always winners and losers when it comes to this. But if you have really good pre-match entertainment, you've got all the food stalls, you've got a bit of live music from a local artist, you've got really buying into the local community, people will spend their money on a match day. I don't think that's the problem. And I think as long as you're providing value to the fan, and then it's finding the balance of building the match day experience for your diehard fan that's there week in, week out. And then it's also, so that's the one environment you have to build. And then the other environment you have to build is your digital brand identity. And that's a completely separate thing. It's not completely separate, but what I mean is you need to understand the experience of your digital fan, because they have a very different experience. So it's like when I watch, say, like MLS, right, and I watch an Inter Miami game, that's going to be a different experience for me compared to the fan sitting in the seat for obvious reasons. So it sounds like, okay, what can we do to build our sort of digital match day experience to make sure our digital fans are even more invested, make sure our digital fans have opportunities to invest their money and purchase things and all the rest of it. So it's like the opportunity is there, both physical and digitally. And obviously the market for the digital fans is larger, but also is the competition. Because if you're going widening your borders out to have fans all over the world, you're competing against, you know, why would someone in Spain be say like a Liverpool fan rather than a Barcelona fan? Like, if you're trying to get a digital audience in Spain, if you're Liverpool Football Club, for example, there's lots of challenges to both. But I think for football clubs to just get it right, invest in the customer experience, improve. The more value you provide to your customer, the more money they're willing to pay for the experience. And then it's also, for me, you've got to get the balance though, because you've got to protect the experience. For not every ticket should be £500 because they have this amazing experience. There needs to be set protections for like a home ticket being X amount, and we're not moving away from that because this is what the season ticket price is, and it makes sure that we don't outprice our sort of long-term supporter base. But then there are also options to, if you want to have this and this and this and this on top, then obviously you can. So I think I think that's really important. So there are lots of clubs. I know AFC Wimbledon are a really, really good club. I'm down there for a conference for the next couple of days, and the stadium itself for the league which they compete in, the division in which they compete in, sorry, is incredible. They've really invested in the infrastructure. They've really invested in the match day feel, and they've really sort of got that. I mean, obviously, their backstory is obviously slightly different with MK Dons breaking away and they reformed a football club. So the sort of like the buy-in from the fans is really, really strong because of their unique story. But they've done it. They've gone about it the right way. There's multiple different football clubs. You have your Forest Green Rovers who are all bought into sort of like the eco scene, and they're saying, we're going to be completely vegan. We're going to do, solar panels and, make sure that everything is absolutely carbon neutral so that we're supporting the environment. And they've got a lot of buy-in from that community. It's like, defining what your tribe is going to be. I'm going to use that term. Define your tribe, define your target audience. I'm trying to use, because I don't want this to sound too corporate, because these are fans at the end of the day, but it's essentially just defining what sort of target audience you want and how do you service them best possible so that you can extract as much value out of them. And again, that sounds horrible, but that's essentially what the game is.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the key thing here that you mentioned is basically a customer experience. So the customer experience is what football really needs to up its game on when you compare it to other sports around the globe. So yeah, let's see how it goes coming with the coming years. But transitioning to sort of like a focus on governance as a competitive advantage. Well, if I ask you now, what does good governance look like when it comes to financial governance in a football club? What does that look like? And also, what are the differences between the sort of a governance structure in a League One club versus a Championship club?
Okay, no, it's a great question. I think there's a few things. I think first thing is sort of there's basics of organizational structure, and we can go into sort of like making sure you have non-exec directors, making sure you have sort of like a supporter liaison, a fan support liaison, so football fans can have their say at board level. Making sure that you've got all your policies ticked off. It's really boring, but like everyone should have an anti-slavery policy. Everyone should have, anti-corruption and all that sort of stuff. So there should be basic policies in place from a governance point of view. They should have, a solid organizational structure. But also it's understanding and transparency from my point of view. So it's understanding what's appropriate for your football club, right? And like you say, what's the difference between Championship and League One? And the biggest difference is just resource, internally. So it's just like, okay, how can we invest in our resource? How should we be investing our resources to best make us sustainable from a governance and financial point of view? Sometimes it's a case of, a lot of the larger football clubs will have people in-house solely working on this role. Other football clubs, it will be a part of somebody else's role to be looking after all this sort of stuff. Or obviously they're getting consultants to come in and help them do all this. From my point of view, from a financial side of view, it's understanding the regulations and understanding how the regulations impact your objectives. So that's the main thing, because if you're I'll use this as an example. Port Vale, brilliant football club. As we're talking right now, brilliant football club. When I was dealing with them as an EFL person at the EFL, never had any real issues with Port Vale. It was almost just like a tick box exercise. It was like everything ticks off, everything's fine. They're never like really overextending to sort of like push the limits of the regulations or anything. They know how the regulations work. They tick it all off. They're happy days. So because they can achieve their set objectives acting in that way. So, but if you're a football club, let's say like a Wrexham, or someone that's got a real high drive of, I want to get to the Premier League as quickly as possible. In order to do that within the financial regulations, you're going to be pushing the limits. You're going to want to claim everything that you can. You're going to want to, get to the last minute detail. And in order to do that, you have to have extreme understanding of the regulations. So, and that's when expertise and stuff helps, because it helps you achieve your objective. So for me, it's football clubs need to be transparent. As well, transparency around their finances. When we talk about governance, it's the doing of the governance and building the organizational structure. That's all great. But you also need transparency, because again, it's about the buy-in from the fans. And there's been so many owners in the past where fans have been dealt a bad hand and sort of it's all gone wrong, and the fans were sort of like, we didn't expect this, we didn't know it was going to happen. And it's just a case of that's because there's a lot of stuff happening behind closed doors. So the more transparent a football club can be with their financial position, with their governance, with all the rest of it, it's just, it gets you that buy-in that's, really sort of necessary for the fans, especially in this day and age where there's been so much more focus on sort of governance and financial sustainability.
Yeah, well said. In terms of the lower leagues, are there like clubs that are currently using smart financial planning tools to push above their weights? If there are any, if not, then yeah, I have a follow-up question. If not,
Yeah, no. So in terms of financial planning tools, that's quite interesting. I think so I talk to the football clubs about this quite a bit in terms of what they should be doing. And there's a lot of duplication of work, which I try to sort of help clubs not do anymore. Because especially now you've got an independent regulator coming in. So you have to, will be a bit more specific. So regulation 16.16 of the EFL is basically it's your FFIs, your future financial information. This is essentially your budget. Now you have to submit either what they call a T+1 or a T+2. So a 1 year or a 2 year forecast, depending on your financial regulatory position. Obviously, you're at high risk, you're going to have to put in 2 years. A low risk, you may only have to submit 1 year. But the point is, just using the regulatory forecasts and the sheets and everything else that you have to fill in sort of legally to meet sort of the financial regulations of football, you should be utilizing these tools to understand your football club better. And also it means that, because one of the frustrating things that we had when I was at the EFL, when I was enforcing the regulations, the one frustrating thing was there would be like a financial director saying, but my owner said I've got £3 million to spend. I'd be like, yeah, that's great, but you don't, because you can only spend £2 million. I'm obviously making these figures up. £2 million because you'll hit your cap on your regulations. So, using the sort of the submission templates that you have to submit is sort of the base of how you control your financial governance. That should be a baseline. Yes, you might have additional planning stuff on top that, you can do additional forecasting on, or, different scenario planning, which I think is really key. Like, scenario planning is one of the most key things that football clubs can do, because if you're saying, oh, well, we'll be in line with the financial regulations because we intend to sell this player in January, let's just say. But then what if you don't? Or what if he gets injured and then they're only willing to, that sale doesn't go through till the summer because they want him to be fully fit? Or they'll happily take him in January, but they're only giving you, I don't know, 75% of what you wanted because of the fact that the player's injured. There's lots of, whatever your key risk is, whatever you're most dependent on, you need to have some sort of scenario planning in place as to what do we do in this scenario. And it's not doomsday planning. It's not planning for planning's sake. But it's good to know, it's good to identify firstly, if that one thing doesn't happen, we've got problems here. So identifying that one thing and then doing some scenario planning to make sure the club's still going to be solvent if that one thing doesn't happen. So yeah, that from a sort of financial planning point of view, it's using the financial submissions as your baseline. But
yeah. I mean, I agree with you. Scenario planning, forecasting are very key tools to make sure that you're being very sort of prudent and pragmatic when it comes to planning around business strategy and making sure that you meet targets or potentially exceed targets. Okay, on scenario planning, for instance, if I'm a football owner or I own a football club in that sense, how am I measuring these football finance directors or CFOs? Is the key KPI, or what am I trying to attribute their impact to? Because obviously you just mentioned those terms, forecasting, scenario planning. Like, how do I know that you're successful, or they're being successful, or they're actually adding value to the institution itself, the football club itself, as opposed to arbitrary metrics?
No, I absolutely agree. There's a few things. The one thing is football clubs need to define that when we talk about objectives, it's like, did they deliver the objective in the budget allocated? That's basically it. It's like, given the resources that they were given, did they achieve the objectives that they were set? It's almost, and so when we talk about sort of non-football club for a quick second, a lot of the objectives is normally in most businesses around sort of revenue generation and making more money. So it's really important for, if you're, say, like a customer service, just answering phones person, it's really important for that person to understand how do they impact revenue. So they might think, well, I just answer phones all day. It's just not. If you deliver a really good customer service, people enjoy, it reflects good on our brand. They're more likely to have repeat purchase, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So your job does really impact our revenue number. Like, although you don't really see it, you're not a salesperson, you're not driving sales, you're just answering queries. You have got an actual impact on the revenue of the company. Now, when you talk about football clubs, you've got two things, right? You've got the revenue of the company in terms of, commercial, hospitality, broadcasting, match day. You've got all your different revenue streams. How successful have they been? How does each individual's role impact those numbers? But then also it's sort of like on-pitch performance. So, for example, if a financial director has a better understanding of the regulations, they might be able to sign a player which they originally thought they couldn't because of XYZ regulation. And actually, no, if you understand the way around this way, or you just sign him through this scenario, then yes, you can bring that football player to your football club, and therefore that is success because they might have contributed to on-pitch success as well. So I think it's really important for football clubs to sort of define what their objectives are, sort of on-pitch, off-pitch, understand how each individual staff member contributes to each one of those things. And then it's a case of, under the given budget, were those objectives met? And then if not, then that's when the reviews comes in as, is that because you weren't effective enough in your role? Or is that because of external factors that we didn't have control over? And then being able to define, well, it was these internal factors need improving, these external factors we can mitigate in some sort of way, but because it's external, we only have so much control over it, and then sort of work in that way. So that's sort of the approach I would take on sort of when it comes to measuring performance. It's just, have they achieved the objective with the budget that they were given?
Right. Okay. That seems very clear. So moving to potentially investors who are listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube, if they were looking at EFL clubs, let's say an American investor, what should they be, and you are advising them, what should they be examining beyond sort of like top line financials?
Okay, so there's a few things. So it's just making sure you consider all factors when buying a football club. So the first thing is obviously the financial position. So one of my roles at the EFL was when there was a change of ownership. From a financial side, there's two things: the source and sufficiency of funds. So source of funds is where's money coming from. That was a governance job. That wasn't my job. That's what the legal department dealt with. I was under sort of sufficiency of funds. So has this new owner got enough funds to sort of control the football club for the next sort of 18 months, or depending on the sort of the time the ownership happened? Have they got enough cash liquid to actually fund the day-to-day? So the one thing, the main thing is making sure that you have enough funds and truly understand how much money it's going to cost you to run your football club. Because a League Two football club right now could easily cost you £2 million a year. Easy. You've got to understand, I need at least £2 million in the bank, plus need to know that I can consistently chuck away, quote unquote, £2 million every year, because that cash is just going to get burnt on the operations of running a football club. And then add on that, if you want to grow up through the divisions, then you've got to put more and more on top of that £2 million to really push yourself forwards. Firstly, it's understanding the finances. Then it's understanding, well, what is the opportunity for growth? So for me, I like to sort of make sure there's singularity and focus, like get one thing right and then do the next thing, and then do the next thing right, then do the next thing, and find out what the most important thing is and just focus on that. So for a lot of football clubs in the EFL, there is a big opportunity in match day. And the reason why I say that is because the infrastructure of some football clubs, and again, it depends on the football club you're buying, so I'm being generic here, like a lot of football clubs are still sort of half empty on many match days. So there's clearly an opportunity there, and it's to fill the match day up. Just like, that's just a basic thing. Just make sure you fill up your stadiums. And then the other thing is, and then plans of how you're going to do that. The other thing is the journey in between match days and the utilization of the stadium. That's your biggest thing. You've got this massive asset, this football stadium. Depending on if you're a championship club, it's slightly different to if you're a League Two club. But even then, you have conference rooms, you have all the rest of it. How are we going to utilize this stadium for all the days in the year that it's not got a game on? Because it's very few, There's very few home games in a season. I know, obviously, if you get a cup run and stuff, that might add on some extras. But realistically, it's like, what's happening on a Wednesday lunchtime at the stadium when there isn't a game on? How are you actually utilizing that asset to generate money? And that's a key thing, and that's the unlock of that is really strong for a lot of football clubs. And again, that is tying into local opportunities around that football club to sort of utilize the space of the stadium.
Yeah, well said. So in terms of due diligence, so in terms of the work you've done, you reflect back or look back on that. What are the most common financial red flags you basically come across?
Red flags. Okay. I think, financial red flags is an interesting one. So when it comes to the selling of a football club, what tends to happen is the best time, again, this is going to sound awful for people listening, but it's just the honest truth. The best time to buy a football club is when an owner is run out of money. He can't afford to buy the football club anymore. So he's got the least amount of leverage, or she got the least amount of leverage in the deal. You've got the most leverage. But you want to grab the football club before it lands into administration, because if it goes into administration, there's a load more legal stuff that you have to deal with. So it's just better off just to so if you can get a football club, if you can buy a football club just before administration, that's sort of like the best value you're going to get. It's the cheapest you're going to buy the football club is at that point. So that's why you see so many football clubs go right down to the wire, is because the new owners are holding on for the best deal possible. And then eventually the current owner goes, "You fine, you win, you have it, because I have got no money left. I need to sell this thing. It's yours at the cheaper price." So, and in terms of red flags, when buying a football club, I suppose I would assess every red flag really when it comes to running, because every different football club is going to have their different financial challenges. It's just understanding what is the cost to overcome that financial challenge, what is actually the driver of that challenge, and how difficult is that to resolve. Right. So if it's a case of a lot of football clubs, then the main thing that's driving their costs up is on pitch, right? So if you sold a couple of players, although that might not be the best thing to do when you come into a football club, immediately sell some high value players, but there's going to be football players that don't contribute their wages, is what I say. Like if you've got someone that's been sat on the bench for the last 3 years, hasn't got on that often, but he's on a decent wage. Like, why? Like, you know what I mean? Either give it to a youth player or find somebody else for that role, because they're not contributing enough minutes to justify the wage, and you can utilize that wage spend on better players, or like better utilize that money and therefore help the performance of the football club. So red flags as well in terms of the other side of things. Some costs are fixed, then you just sort of gonna have to accept it. So for example, like this is daft, but like the floodlighting and running of the stadium and the general sort of like utility bills of sort of like your gas, water, electric of running a football stadium is really high now. So it's a case of like some of that is sort of set. Yes, you can renegotiate deals to try and get better rates and whatnot. Yeah. But there is sort of like a standard flat rate of that's what you're accepted to pay. So when buying this football club, are you happy with that red flag, if you like? Are you happy that you're going to have to take on that associated bill and there isn't all that much you can do about it? So there's certain costs that you can directly impact and you can change overnight, and there's other costs that are pretty fixed and it's just the cost of running a football club. But yeah, there is other aspects. I mean, one of the things that it sort of goes back onto the last point more than a red flag, but it's like understanding what the local competition is. So like some football clubs are sort of, one club cities, as you sort of know them as. Whereas other football clubs have so much, like if you bought a football club in Manchester, for example, there's so many football clubs in Manchester that you're going to find it very difficult to attract new fans in the local area, because almost everybody has a football club because there's so much to choose from. Whereas if you're going to somewhere like Plymouth, Argyle, there's less competition for football clubs. There's less professional football clubs in that part of the country. So therefore, if you bought a football club around there, you might have more chance of attracting different fans because of the fact that there's less competition. And then you also look at obviously the population density and all that sort of stuff. You're taking all that into consideration when you're considering how many fans can you actually get to this stadium.
Right. Okay. That's understood. So looking ahead to football's regulatory environment, and we know David Cogan is coming in, I think, as the chairman of the independent regulatory board. So I think he has to pick independent regulator, and he oversees that process. What impact? I mean, everyone is worried about, or I mean, there's been a lot of talk and obviously generated by the media for the most part in terms of the impact on the two different football bodies. What tangible impact do you actually see coming from the independent regulator when it actually does get set?
I think it will have an impact. It will have an impact. At sort of a minute level, either way, it's going to have a resource impact. There is going to be some forms that, even if it was like the lightest touch regulation, there's going to be some forms you've got to fill out. There's going to be some submissions, some financial submissions you're going to have to give to this new independent regulator. Even at a lightest touch thing, there's going to be more stuff from a resource point of view football clubs are going to have to do, right? So it's making sure do football clubs actually have the resource to be doing whatever extra workload is put onto the football club. That's one thing. But in terms of the impact, it sort of depends on the approach in which the regulator takes. So, and sort of the level in which they enforce it. So at the moment, you've got 4 what I call key financial regulatory models in football right now. So you have income models, which is where football clubs can spend a percentage of the total income that they have. I use the word income, not revenue, purposefully, because it's also owner injections and stuff can be used within the calculation. So we're talking like salary cost management protocol. That's an example of an income model. Then you've got cost models. So you've got a sort of wage cap. So it's just a set number. Don't matter how much income you have. It's just this is how much you can spend. That is a set salary cap. We had that in League One and League Two for one transfer window before the PFA turned it over and said we're not doing that because legally players didn't want their wages capped. But that's another way you can sort of control financial wage, sort of the wage spend within football, because that's the main issue from a spending point of view that needs sort of capping. So income model, expenditure model, then you've got profit models, which is what's the amount of allowable losses football clubs are allowed to make in a given reporting period. So sort of your profitability and sustainability rules. So that's controlling profits. And then finally, you've got funding models, which is sort of what I refer to, which is sort of your FFIs. Like, have you got the cash? Have you got the liquidity to actually keep this football club going on a day-to-day basis? So they're sort of like the 4 core things that the regulator can look at and monitor and sort of cap and control. Then it's sort of, well, okay, how does it monitor it? How does it control it? So again, we've got 3 ways currently in which football clubs' finances are monitored. Pretty straightforward. You've got historical monitoring, which is sort of your profitability and sustainability rules. This is looking at past performance. That was your accounting period. Your accounts are signed off. What happened in that? It's looking back historically. Then you've got live monitoring. This happens in real time. So salary cost management protocol. So for example, what would happen on in a transfer window? A football club would sign a player. It would come up on FAS, which is the system where all the transfers go through and everything. I would look at the player's contract. I would then update that football club's finances in real time to see, can this football club afford these additional wages of this player? So you'd go through the contract, look at all the wages, look at the bonuses, put it all in, and the agent fees, the IM1s, check the IM1s, see the breakdown of the agent's fees. You put that in, and then, yeah, they can afford this player under the regulations, player's approved, the player gets signed, it gets registered at the EFL. That sort of live monitoring, again, that's really good because football clubs can't breach them. And what I mean is, if I did those calculations and the football club couldn't afford the player, what would happen is that player wouldn't be officially registered for the football club until one of 2 things. One is they sold a player, because sometimes it's a case we've signed him, but we're going to sell that person, so then it'll work out. So sometimes it's just holding the registration until they can get rid of the player. Or you need additional owner fundings to cover the additional wages. So they can look at live monitoring, and that'll impact football clubs because it means that it'll be more difficult to register players in real time. And then the final one is future. So you got historical, live, and future. So what you're looking at is then forecast monitoring, what you're looking like over the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And essentially depends on what sort of time period the regulator wants to look at. That could be a lot of work, because all of a sudden, if the regulator, this isn't going to happen, but in a hypothetical scenario, if an independent regulator said, we want to know your plans for the next 5 years, all of a sudden that's a lot of forecasting you got to do. That's a lot of, financial modeling you'd have to do to figure out what your football club is going to look like in 5 years. Also, with football, it's very difficult as well because you've got promotion and relegation, which massively impacts the financial position. So forecasting is actually quite difficult in football. That's why we tend to stick to sort of T+1, T+2, because if you're assuming that you're operating in the same division you are currently, this is what we think our costs are going to be, this is what we think our revenue is going to be, etc. But yeah, the independent regulator, depending on what path they choose in terms of what sort of regulatory approach, what are they choosing to cap and monitor, what are they choosing, how they choose to sort of enforce those regulations is going to make a difference on the impact that ultimately has on the football clubs. Because if it's just historical monitoring and all the football club had to do is submit their annual accounts to the independent regulator, that's like relatively easy for football clubs to do on a day-to-day basis. If it's something that they have to track in real time, live monitoring, making sure they understand their live position constantly, that's additional workload for them. So it depending on the path the independent regulator takes will depend on the sort of the day-to-day impact that's going to have at the football club.
Yeah, well said. I agree with everything you shared there. So moving to your work with Fair Game, if I'm not mistaken, you're director there. Can you just give a sort of like an understanding of what your journey has been like there? You know, what basically you've seen as the impacts and what your position is going forward in terms of trying to have a broader conversational change around governance and more transparency around football.
Yes, our relationship as Goal Assist with Fair Game is one of partnership. So what we do is we're sort of the operational arm of Fair Game, if you like. So it's when I moved out of the EFL and I started Goal Assist, the one thing that I wanted to do is make sure that I'm running ethically and making sure that, you know, what I do has a positive impact on the game. So one organization and the one way that I thought football needed, and I agree, thought that football needed an independent regulator. The reason why I believe that is because as someone who was enforcing the regulations of the EFL, I knew there is massive advantages for an independent regulator to be doing this. I know an independent regulator would have far more resource. So, for example, at one point during my time at the EFL, it was me and one other person enforcing the financial regulations of 72 football clubs. Like, that resource has now grown within the EFL. Like I say, we set up the club financial reporting unit. The at max, if they get the new hires in that they want, they'll get up to 5 people. Now, still, that's 5 people looking after 72 football clubs. So it's still not realistically an appropriate amount of resource to do the level of financial reviews that I think football clubs deserve in order to assess, and football fans deserve more to make sure football is acting sustainably. So I knew we needed an independent regulator. So Fair Game, essentially, an institution of football clubs and people of government, MPs, who were all sort of, their original goal was to sort of fight for a new independent regulator for football. Now they're achieving that because obviously a new independent regulator is coming in. It's like, how can they continue to help push the financial sustainability, the good governance, the EDR, everything else, the fan engagement? How can we improve that across the football industry? And I said, look, Niall Cooper, who's the founder of Fair Game, I said to him, look, you guys are working on the macro, the big picture, the holistic of the game. Someone needs to be out there doing the day-to-day. Someone needs to be the person that can go in and actually assess on a help jump in, or that you've got an FD that's out for the next 5 weeks. You need someone to pick up stuff. Like, you need someone who can actively act as sort of this financial support arm to football clubs. So that's essentially what Goal Assist does with Fair Game. So recently we've produced a financial review of Swindon Town. So Swindon Town Football Club, the new owners basically reached out, well, when they were new, they reached out and said, look, the thing is, Swindon Town have had a really bad run of ownership in the past. They've gone through a lot, Swindon Town fans have. And what the new owners wanted to do, what Clem Mulvaney wanted to do, is say, look, we want to build trust with our fan base. So what we want to do is have someone come in and do an independent financial review of our football club each year. I want you to explain the financial accounts to the football club, to the fans, and do it in a way in which sort of like the fans can understand what's going on financially. If, like, even if you're not sort of like a finance person, understand that the football club is being run in a good way. So, and again, if it wasn't, I would have just reviewed it and been honest and like, look, these costs are way too high or whatever. There's the whole point of having an independent review, because what the fans would say, well, if the clubs did this internally, of course the club's going to say everything's okay, because they're not going to be like, we did an internal review and it was a load of rubbish, because they're the ones running it. So as an independent member going out, doing the review, and sort of explaining it in a way fans can build trust with the owners. That's one of the things that Goal Assist have done, sort of in partnership with Fair Game, because Swindon Town are a Fair Game club, because they've sort of signed up to pushing an independent regulator and all the rest of it. So that's just an example of sort of like how we're operationally producing reports or doing financial analysis or, helping with financial regulations, that sort of stuff that we do on behalf of Fair Game to help support the Fair Game clubs.
Yeah, it's a very admirable initiative, and I can see it's having like a broader impact beyond just England going forward. But yeah, so let's move to or transition to our last segment, and basically, this is where I ask you quick fire questions, and you tell me what first comes to mind. So the first one I would say to you is, if you could rewrite one EFL financial rule, what would that be and why?
Okay. Very quickly, so if I was quickly going into squad cost ratio, so it's moving away from S&P and PNS and it's going to squad cost ratio. Trying to make this quick fire.
Okay.
One of the main things is I agree with the new squad cost ratio. I think this is a bit technical, but basically reducing football fortune income and making it relevant turnover. That means nothing if you don't understand the terms, but having more relevant turnover, less football fortune income. So then a percentage of owner injection is protected for off-pitch investment rather than all going on pitch. I think that's really key.
That should be well understood to people who understand that. Looking at clubs like Port Vale, taking clubs like Port Vale out of the picture, what other clubs in the EFL would you say, in your opinion, are well run from a financial perspective?
Okay, so obviously Swindon Town, based on the review I just did, it's going really well. It's a really well-balanced club. Like I say, I've mentioned Forest Green, I've mentioned Port Vale, I've mentioned AFC Wimbledon. Plymouth are a well-run club. Accrington Stanley. See, the thing is, the problem is I'm talking from so Accrington Stanley is a really interesting one because Accrington Stanley are sort of known as being a well-run club, but the problem is they're not very transparent with their finances with the fans. So it's a case of I can talk from a position of I've been at the EFL, I've seen the finances of the football club. I can tell you that it's a well-run club, and Andy Holt and the owners. I know obviously things are changing at the club right now, but I think Accrington Stanley are being ran well, but I think they need to be more transparent with their finances. And it's the same with a lot of the lower league clubs. It's about transparency as well as being well run so that the fans are being aware of the financial position of the football club. Sorry, that wasn't very quick.
No, it's fair. It's a good answer though. So the final one, when reviewing, they'll have one more after this. When reviewing a club's books, so what's the first financial metric you focus on to make sure you're going through the right path?
Well, the first thing that I would do when assessing the football club's position is to sort of calculate their financial regulatory position. So what you do is you take their finances, you look at the submission deadlines, and you understand like how much. So if you're a championship club, it'll be how much headroom do you have before you run out of your allowable loss threshold. For PNS. For SEMP, it's slightly different because owners can always chuck in additional money to help support it. But it's a case of how much money, how close are you to the edge? How much owner money do you have available to help cover these expenses? So it's firstly to understand the financial regulatory position, because that's where your first problems. Because if you start breaching financial regulations, you get points penalties, you get massive fines. So like for me, is that the other thing, the two other quick things is one is HMRC reporting. It's making sure that you're paying the HMRC. They will freeze your bank account quicker than if you're not paying your taxes and stuff, they will come after you very quickly. We had at the EFL, my span was sort of regulation 16, 17 and 18. And regulation 17 is all to do with HMRC reporting. And during COVID, basically, football clubs were given a bit of a leeway on the certain taxes and stuff they had to pay. But basically, the bill built up. And there were some issues with football clubs not making their repayments quick enough. And HMRC were very hot on, like, you need to contact the football club today because we will just freeze their bank account and take the money. So make sure you pay HMRC. Make sure you're in line with sort of your financial regulations from a EFL Premier League point of view. And then the other thing is also making sure, because the other stakeholder that's really well protected is other football clubs. So if you've got transfer fees that are like staggered over time and you have to pay for them over a certain period, like make sure that you've got that funding available. Make sure that that money's going out on the day you said that was going out. Or if you don't have that money on that day, make sure you've got a new agreement in place that says we can pay you on this day rather than this day. Because if you don't have that in place, again, they're really well protected with the regulations. So yeah, they're the sort of key things that I'd sort of look at.
Well explained. Final question: what book would you say outside of football? What book have you said has informed you as a man, as a person?
Wow, great books. So there's a few. Recently, I've come across, from an entrepreneurial business point of view, I've come across the sort of the $1 million series by Alex Hormozy. They're interesting from like a tactical business point of view, when you're sort of like building your offer and all that sort of stuff. When it comes to personal finances, I read sort of like the Rich Dad Poor Dad books when I was younger. They were really good. And then from a really off the beat, if you want me to throw in a bit of one of the ones, there's two actually. I like reading autobiographies. So Muhammad Ali's autobiography was just incredible in terms of like his journey, not just as an athlete, but his story out of the ring and the racism and the Vietnam War and everything that he, like, incredible story. And then the other person, which is a bit left field, but Leonardo da Vinci, if you've read his autobiography, he is just gotta be one of the smartest people to ever have lived. His attention to detail, like one of the things I took from that book was you have to have attention to detail. He was asked to sculpt basically a soldier riding a horse. I'm oversimplifying this. Most people would either look at other sculptures or go look at some horses and like sculpt it. He got himself like a dead horse, did a full dissection, a full autonomy of the horse, so he could understand how each of the individual muscles worked and how the structure of the bones and how that all worked. So when he was sculpting it out of stone, he would look as realistic as possible. Now that attention of detail is insane. It's like you would never to think to go to that extent to just do a statue. But there was a million other examples of like the level of extent he would go to make sure the minute details in his paintings and all the rest of it were absolutely exact. And I think that's something that everyone can take. It's easy to like skip over the little 1%, but it's all those 1% that add up that make the big picture and can make a real big impact onto your life, but also obviously to your business, to your football club, however you want to apply it. So yeah.
Yeah, incredible way to finish. I would add to that, is that Walter Isaacson's book on the Leonardo da Vinci? Yeah, I have it sitting on the shelf. I should read it. But yeah, read it. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Joshua, for giving us a deep dive into the business side of football finance, from regulation to sustainability to governance and investor readiness. So yeah, thank you again, Joshua, for coming on.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So yeah, that's a wrap for this episode of the Football Economy. If you found this conversation, as usual, insightful and helpful, please do subscribe and share with relevant colleagues or people who are interested in the football space from a business perspective. And until next time, thank you. Have a good one.